As the soft whispers of a distant Texas wind gently rustle through unseen leaves, and the quiet chorus of crickets begins its nightly serenade, we invite you to settle into a space of calm. Tonight, we embark upon a journey not through the clamour of political theatre, but through the quiet unfolding of a life that shaped a significant chapter in American history. This is not a tale of dramatic pronouncements, but a gentle exploration of a presence that emerged from the heartland, grew in influence, and ultimately left an indelible mark. We turn our attention now to Lyndon Baines Johnson, a figure often remembered for his commanding presence and the sweeping legislative changes enacted during his time. Yet, beneath the familiar narratives of power and policy lies a complex human story, woven into the fabric of the 20th century. Our purpose this evening is not to analyse or to debate, but simply to observe, allowing the historical narrative to unfold at its own unhurried pace. Imagine for a moment the vast quiet landscapes of central Texas where his story began. Picture the distant horizons, the enduring sky, and the slow rhythm of life that shaped his earliest years. It is within this gentle, reflective space that we will trace the arc of his existence, from his humble beginnings to the highest office and beyond. There will be no urgency in our telling, only the steady flow of historical fact, presented with a quiet clarity designed to accompany you into a state of deep relaxation. Allow your mind to drift gently with the unfolding narrative. Let the details of his life, his challenges, and his contributions become a soothing backdrop to your quiet contemplation. We will move through time with a measured calm, examining the milestones, the influences, and the decisions that defined him. This is an invitation to simply listen, to absorb, and to let the passage of history guide you towards a tranquil repose. The story of Lyndon B. Johnson, presented now in its entirety as a quiet companion for your journey into rest. Deep in the heart of Texas, where the land rises and falls in ancient rolling waves, lies the hill country. This was the landscape that greeted Lyndon Baines Johnson upon his birth on August 27th, 1808. It is a place of stark beauty and demanding realities, a mosaic of limestone hills, spring-fed rivers, and tenacious scrub oak. Here, the sun beats down with an unwavering intensity during the long summers, and the winter winds can carry a biting chill across the open plains. Life in this rugged territory at the turn of the 20th century was defined by an intimate connection to the earth and an enduring spirit of self-reliance. Farms were often small, carved from the rocky soil, and sustenance was hard won. The rhythms of daily existence were dictated by the seasons, by the rise and set of the sun, and by the persistent effort required to coax a living from the land. There was no electricity in many homes, no running water, and the distant towns offered only the most basic amenities. One might imagine the sounds of that era: the rhythmic creak of a windmill turning in the breeze, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of dry grass underfoot, and the quiet hum of insects in the warm air. The scent of cedar and sun-baked earth would have been ever present, mingling with the aroma of wood smoke from a cooking fire. It was a world where human endeavour was pitted against the vastness and sometimes unforgiving nature of the environment. Children in this setting learned early the lessons of practicality and perseverance. They understood the value of hard work, the necessity of community, and the profound importance of resilience. The hill country fostered a particular kind of character, independent, resourceful, and deeply rooted in its surroundings. It was a place where stories were told around simple hearths, and the bonds of family and neighbour were a primary source of strength. This landscape, with its challenges and its quiet grandeur, provided the foundational experiences for the young Lyndon Johnson, shaping his understanding of the world and the people within it. Within the quiet expanse of the Texas Hill Country, near the small community of Stonewall, a new life entered the world on August 27th, 1908. This was the birth of Lyndon Baines Johnson, a name that would, in time, resonate far beyond the cedar breaks and limestone hills of his native land. His arrival took place in a modest farmhouse, a simple structure reflective of the era and the region's character. His parents were Rebecca Baines Johnson and Sam Ely Johnson Jr. Rebecca, a woman of refined sensibilities and intellectual curiosity, brought a lineage rich with educators and individuals dedicated to public service. Her family, the Baines, held a deep respect for learning and a tradition of civic engagement, including a grandfather who served in the Texas legislature and as a college president. From her, young Lyndon would inherit a love for words and an appreciation for the power of persuasion. Sam Ely Johnson Jr., Lyndon's father, was a man of the land and a seasoned politician within the state. He too came from a family with roots in Texas and a history of involvement in public affairs. Sam Jr. served multiple terms in the Texas House of Representatives, a populist Democrat who understood the intricate dance of local politics and the art of connecting with constituents. He possessed a robust, engaging personality, a talent for storytelling, and a deep understanding of the practicalities of rural life. The union of Rebecca and Sam Ely Johnson Jr. thus brought together two distinct yet complementary streams of influence. On one side, a heritage of intellectual pursuit and a commitment to education. On the other, a robust engagement with the political landscape and a pragmatic understanding of the needs of ordinary Texans. These familial currents, flowing through generations, would subtly begin to shape the environment in which Lyndon Johnson would grow, hinting at the future path he would eventually forge. The values of service, education, and political engagement were woven into the very fabric of his early life, forming an inherent part of his familial inheritance. Lyndon's early childhood unfolded amidst the unhurried rhythms of rural Texas life. The family home, though modest, was a hub of activity and instruction. It was a place where books were valued and discussions about current events were commonplace, often initiated by his mother, Rebecca. She fostered in him a budding intellectual curiosity, encouraging him to read and to articulate his thoughts clearly. The sounds of everyday life in the hill country, from the chirping of crickets at dusk to the distant lowing of cattle, formed the quiet soundtrack of his earliest memories. Life on the farm demanded participation from every member of the family. Young Lyndon observed and, as he grew, contributed to the daily chores that sustained them. He learned the practicalities of tending to livestock, the effort involved in cultivating the land, and the constant vigilance required against the unpredictable forces of nature. These experiences instilled in him an early understanding of hard work, perseverance, and the direct relationship between effort and outcome. Despite the intellectual leanings within the home, that of the Johnson family often contended with financial strain. Sam Ely Johnson Jr.'s political career, while bringing a certain local prominence, did not always provide consistent financial stability. This reality meant that frugality was a necessity and resourcefulness a prized virtue. Lyndon witnessed firsthand the challenges of making ends meet, the anxieties associated with unpredictable harvests, and the impact of broader economic fluctuations on a family's well-being. These observations, absorbed in the quiet moments of childhood, impressed upon him the importance of economic security and the constant struggle faced by many families in rural America. Within this close-knit family environment, values of self-reliance, community responsibility, and a deep, abiding connection to the land were quietly imparted. Though a boy, as Lyndon was an attentive observer, absorbing the nuances of human interaction, the dynamics of his parents' relationship, and the unspoken lessons of their daily lives. These formative years, marked by both intellectual stimulation and the stark realities of rural existence, laid a foundational layer for the complex individual he would become. The shadow and light of Sam Ely Johnson Jr.'s life cast a long and influential presence over his son, Lyndon. Sam Ely was a figure deeply rooted in the political landscape of Texas, serving multiple terms as a state legislator. From a young age, Lyndon observed his father's engagement with public life, witnessing the meticulous preparations for legislative sessions and the vigorous debates that followed. The family home often buzzed with political discourse, as neighbours and constituents would gather to discuss local issues or to seek Sam Ely's counsel. Sam Ely Johnson Jr. possessed a natural gift for oratory. He could command attention with his words, articulating his views with conviction and a certain theatrical flair. Young Lyndon would often listen, perhaps from the periphery, as his father captivated an audience, whether on a dusty campaign trail or within the more formal setting of the State House. This early exposure to powerful, persuasive speech undoubtedly left an impression, demonstrating the profound capacity of language to sway opinion and to mobilize action. It offered a quiet lesson in the art of communication and the mechanics of influence, skills that Lyndon would later hone and wield with remarkable effectiveness. However, Sam Ely's life was also marked by periods of considerable financial struggle. The precarious nature of farming in the Texas Hill Country, coupled with the often unpredictable income from public service, meant that the family faced seasons of hardship. Lyndon witnessed his father's determination in the face of these economic challenges, observing the resilience required to navigate lean times. He saw the toll that financial uncertainty could take, but also the unwavering resolve to overcome it. These experiences painted a vivid picture of perseverance, of continuing despite setbacks, a quality that would become deeply ingrained in Lyndon's own character. The interplay of his father's political passion and his personal financial battles provided Lyndon with a complex perspective on power. He observed that public service, while noble and impactful, did not always translate into personal wealth. He saw that influence could be wielded even from a position of relative financial modesty. These early lessons, absorbed through the quiet observation of his father's triumphs and tribulations, taught him that power was not solely about riches, but about connection, persuasion, and an unyielding will to enact change. Sam Ely Johnson Jr. offered his son a living example of a man deeply involved in the world, dedicated to public duty, yet constantly battling the practicalities of existence. This multifaceted paternal influence subtly shaped Lyndon's understanding of leadership, ambition, and the enduring effort required to leave a mark upon the world. In contrast to the robust and often boisterous presence of his father, Rebecca Baines Johnson, Lyndon's mother, there represented a quieter yet equally profound influence. She was a woman of notable education and refinement, a lineage that traced back to figures of intellectual and political prominence. Rebecca held deep aspirations for her children, envisioning lives filled with learning and achievement beyond the confines of their rural existence. She believed firmly in the power of education as a transformative force, a pathway to broader horizons and greater opportunities. Rebecca possessed a profound love of literature, and this passion permeated the Johnson household. Despite the rustic setting of their home, she cultivated an atmosphere where books were cherished and reading was encouraged. She would often read aloud to her children, introducing them to stories, poems, and historical accounts that expanded their imaginations and nurtured their intellectual curiosity. These quiet moments of shared reading provided a window into worlds far removed from the daily rhythms of farm life, instilling in young Lyndon an early appreciation for the power of narrative and the richness of human experience. Her efforts to provide a refined upbringing amidst the practicalities of rural Texas were constant. Rebecca strived to impart manners, a sense of decorum, and an appreciation for culture. She taught her children the importance of proper speech and the value of intellectual pursuits. While the surrounding environment demanded hard physical labor and a pragmatic outlook, Rebecca gently steered her children towards a more cultivated understanding of the world, emphasizing the development of the mind and the spirit. This gentle influence stood in distinct contrast to the more overtly political and often forceful nature of Sam Ely Jr., where his father taught through direct engagement with the world of politics and the realities of financial struggle. Rebecca guided through inspiration, through the quiet example of intellectual pursuit and refined taste. She offered a counterpoint, a balance to the ruggedness of their surroundings and the demanding expectations of his father. Her aspirations for Lyndon extended beyond mere survival or even political success. She dreamt of a son who would be educated, articulate, and capable of making a significant positive impact on society through intellectual leadership. Her steady, cultured presence provided a foundation of sensitivity and an enduring belief in the potential for greatness, and subtly shaping the future leader's comprehensive worldview. As Lyndon grew, his days in the one-room schoolhouse of Johnson City became a microcosm of his developing personality. His academic performance was not consistently outstanding, yet it was marked by periods of intense focus and bursts of intellectual engagement. He possessed a sharp mind, particularly in subjects that captured his interest, and a capacity for absorbing information quickly when motivated. However, like many energetic young boys, his attention could sometimes wander, and his grades would reflect these fluctuations in engagement. Yet, even in these early years, there was an undeniable intellectual spark, a quickness of thought that teachers and peers observed. His early social interactions within the school environment were telling, yet Lyndon was rarely a passive observer. He displayed a natural inclination towards engagement, often seeking to connect with his classmates and exert a subtle influence over their activities. There are accounts from his youth that speak of his ability to mediate disputes among his peers or to organize games and adventures. These were not grand acts of leadership, but rather small, everyday instances where his presence seemed to naturally draw others. He possessed an innate understanding of group dynamics, even at a young age, and an emerging skill in persuasion. One anecdote from his school days, recounted by those who knew him then, illustrates this developing ambition. During a school play, young Lyndon, perhaps sensing an opportunity or simply driven by an internal desire to be noticed, managed to secure a more prominent role than initially assigned. This was achieved not through overt defiance, but through a quiet persistence and a subtle lobbying of the teacher in charge. Such moments, seemingly minor in isolation, hinted at a deeper drive. They revealed a nascent understanding of how to navigate social structures and how to achieve desired outcomes within a group setting. These early experiences in the schoolroom and on the playground of Johnson City were foundational. They allowed him to test the boundaries of his influence, to practice the art of communication, and to begin to understand the give and take of human relationships. The simple act of attending school, of being part of a larger community of peers and authority figures, provided a fertile ground for the qualities that would later define his public life: his ambition, his social acumen, and his persistent drive to be at the center of activity. The quiet hum of the schoolhouse, with its lessons and its social intricacies, was a silent training ground for the intricate world he would eventually command. As Lyndon entered his high school years in Johnson City, a more defined set of interests began to emerge, subtly shaping his trajectory. The intellectual curiosity fostered by his mother, combined with his father's rhetorical flair, found a natural outlet in the school's debate and public speaking activities. He gravitated towards these forums, not merely as an academic exercise, but as a stage upon which he could test his voice and his capacity to sway opinion. The high school auditorium, a modest space in a small town, became an early proving ground. Lyndon discovered a particular aptitude for crafting arguments and delivering them with conviction. He learned the rhythm of speech, the power of pauses, and the art of engaging an audience. These were skills he honed diligently, often spending hours preparing his points and anticipating counter-arguments. While his academic record remained somewhat uneven, his performance in these oratorical contests was often distinguished, marking him as a student with a unique talent for communication. Beyond the classroom and the debate stage, a subtle shift was occurring within young Lyndon. Johnson City, though home, began to feel increasingly circumscribed. The horizons of his world, once defined by the rolling hills and the Pedernales River, were slowly expanding. Learned conversations at home, infused with his father's political discussions and his mother's broader cultural interests, provided glimpses of a world beyond their immediate surroundings. He absorbed stories of state politics, of larger cities, and of opportunities that lay elsewhere. This growing awareness was not yet a fully formed plan, but rather a developing sense of unease with the perceived limitations of his environment. There was a quiet yearning for something more, an unspoken ambition stirring within him. He observed the paths taken by others in his community and seemed to contemplate alternative routes. While he participated in the daily rhythms of small-town life, a part of him was already looking outwards, imagining a future that might transcend the familiar. This nascent desire for a larger stage, for a life with greater scope, began to subtly influence his choices and his outlook during these formative high school years. Upon completing high school, a period of quiet transition unfolded for Lyndon B. Johnson. Rather than immediately pursuing a clear path, he embarked on a journey westward, leaving the familiar landscapes of Texas for the distant promise of California. This decision marked a departure, a momentary stepping away from the expectations that might have been forming around him in Johnson City. The journey itself was an exploration, a physical movement away from his origins. In California, he found himself amidst new surroundings, a different pace of life, and an anonymity that was both novel and perhaps a little disorienting. He took on various odd jobs, often physically demanding, which offered a stark contrast to the intellectual pursuits he'd begun to cultivate. These experiences, though temporary, provided a different kind of education, one rooted in observation and the daily rhythms of labour. This period in California was not defined by grand achievements or dramatic events, but rather by a more subtle, internal process. It was a time for searching, for taking stock without the immediate pressures of family or community. Away from the intense influence of his parents and the close-knit society of the hill country, Lyndon had an opportunity for quiet reflection. He could contemplate his burgeoning ambitions, the skills he had developed, and the kind of future he genuinely desired. The vastness of California, with its different social dynamics and economic opportunities, offered a broader perspective than he had known. Yet beneath the surface, the core of his Texan identity remained. The values of resilience, hard work, and a certain pragmatic approach to life, instilled in him since childhood, continued to guide his observations. Ultimately, this journey to the Pacific coast served as a temporary sojourn, a brief interlude for self-discovery. It allowed him to experience a world beyond Texas, to test his independence, and perhaps to confirm, in the quiet of his own thoughts, what truly mattered to him. After a time, the magnetic pull of home, and perhaps a clearer understanding of his own aspirations, drew him back to Texas, ready to embark on the next phase of his life with a renewed sense of purpose. Upon his return to Texas, a more defined path began to emerge for Lyndon B. Johnson. In 1927, He enrolled at Southwest Texas State Teachers College, situated in the quiet town of San Marcos. This institution, now known as Texas State University, would become the setting for a significant chapter in his early adulthood. It represented a deliberate choice, a commitment to formal education after his period of self-reflection. The academic environment at Southwest Texas State Teachers College was one of practicality and purpose. Its primary mission was to train educators for the burgeoning school systems of Texas. The curriculum emphasized pedagogy, subject matter proficiency, and the development of skills necessary for classroom leadership. For Lyndon, this was not merely an intellectual pursuit, but a pragmatic step towards a stable profession and a means to elevate his standing. He approached his studies with a quiet, yet formidable, determination. While not always the most conventional student, his ambition was clear. He focused on subjects that would prepare him for teaching, absorbing the principles of education and the practicalities of managing a classroom. The college offered a structured environment where he could channel his considerable energy and intellect into acquiring a degree. His time there was marked by a steady, methodical effort. He understood the value of the credential, the door it would open for future opportunities. This period was characterized by a diligent engagement with his coursework, a commitment to mastering the material, and a growing understanding of the power of education as a tool for personal and societal advancement. The pursuit of his degree was not without its challenges, requiring sustained effort and a clear vision of his goals. The college experience provided more than just academic knowledge. It offered a setting for the refinement of his social skills and an expansion of his network. He engaged with fellow students and faculty, honing his ability to connect with diverse individuals. These interactions, combined with his focused academic work, quietly solidified his resolve. The degree from Southwest Texas State Teachers College would serve as a foundational step, equipping him with both the formal qualifications and the deepened understanding of human interaction that would prove invaluable in his journey. After earning his teaching certificate, Lyndon Johnson embarked on his first professional role in 1928, accepting a position at the Wellhausen School in Cotulla, Texas. This small, agricultural community, located in the southern part of the state, offered a stark contrast to the familiar landscapes of his youth. Here, he encountered a world of profound economic hardship and deep-seated social stratification. His students were predominantly Mexican-American children, many from families of migrant farm workers. Their lives were marked by the daily struggles of poverty, inadequate housing, insufficient nutrition, and limited access to basic resources. Johnson observed firsthand the effects of this deprivation on the children in his classroom. Their clothing was often worn, their bellies sometimes empty, and their prospects for a future beyond agricultural labour appeared grim. The experience in Cotulla was a quiet awakening for him. While he had known hardship in his own upbringing, the scale and systemic nature of the poverty he witnessed among these families were deeply impactful. He saw how language barriers and cultural differences compounded the economic challenges, creating an environment where opportunities were scarce. The children often spoke Spanish at home, and the school system, though striving, was ill-equipped to fully bridge these divides. This period was not merely a job, it was an immersion into a segment of society that often remained unseen or overlooked by the wider political discourse. He witnessed the quiet dignity of these families alongside the daily indignities they faced. The stark realities of discrimination and limited access to resources left an indelible mark upon his consciousness. The seeds of future policy considerations were quietly sown during these months in Cotulla. Observing the profound need, the lack of basic support, and the systemic barriers faced by these children, a nascent understanding of social injustice began to deepen within him. This first-hand encounter with the marginalized and the impoverished would subtly inform his perspectives, laying a foundation for later commitments to civil rights and anti-poverty initiatives, even if those grander ambitions were still years away. It was a formative experience, shaping his empathetic understanding of those struggling on the periphery of opportunity. As Lyndon Johnson navigated his early career, the wider American landscape was undergoing a profound and unsettling transformation. The year 1929, marking the onset of the Great Depression, unleashed an era of unprecedented economic turmoil that would reshape the nation and the lives of millions. The quiet collapse of the stock market in October of that year sent ripples of instability through every sector of society. Factories slowed production, then ceased altogether, leading to mass unemployment. Across cities and towns, bread lines grew long, and soup kitchens became vital lifelines for families who had lost everything. Farmers, already contending with the challenges of the Dust Bowl in some regions, watched crop prices plummet, their livelihoods evaporating. Homes were foreclosed upon, and entire families found themselves displaced, often embarking on desperate journeys in search of work or refuge. The prevailing mood was one of uncertainty and despair. The traditional American ideals of self-reliance and upward mobility seemed to falter in the face of such widespread economic collapse. Banks failed, savings vanished, and a deep sense of disillusionment settled over the populace. The federal government under President Herbert Hoover struggled to respond effectively, adhering initially to principles of limited intervention that proved insufficient against the scale of the crisis. This period of national hardship created a unique political climate. Public trust in institutions wavered, and a palpable yearning for decisive leadership emerged. People sought solutions, not just to alleviate immediate suffering, but to restore stability and hope for the future. The economic crisis intensified existing social inequalities and exposed vulnerabilities that had long been present within the nation's fabric. It was into this profoundly altered America that young Lyndon Johnson was stepping. The Great Depression was not merely an economic event. It was a societal crucible that forged new political philosophies and demanded new forms of governmental action. The widespread suffering and the urgent need for remedies would fundamentally shape the political discourse for decades to come, creating a fertile ground for leaders who promised change and a more active role for government in safeguarding the welfare of its citizens. This national context would become the very air Johnson breathed as he began his own ascent in public life. In 1931, a significant shift occurred in Lyndon Johnson's trajectory. The young Texan, still in his early 20s, moved to Washington, D.C., taking on the role of Congressional Secretary for Representative Richard M. Kleberg of Texas. This relocation marked his first direct entry into the world of federal politics, a realm far removed from the dusty roads of the Hill Country or the classrooms of Cotulla. His initial impressions of the capital city were likely vivid. Washington, D.C. in the early 1930s possessed a unique atmosphere, a blend of stately architecture and the quiet, persistent hum of political activity. The grand monuments and federal buildings, steeped in history, contrasted with the tangible anxieties of the Great Depression, which still cast a long shadow over the nation. Johnson, ever observant, would have quickly absorbed the rhythm of this new environment. As a congressional secretary, his duties were varied, encompassing administrative tasks, correspondence, and assisting with constituent requests. Yet for Johnson, this position was much more than a clerical role. It was an unparalleled opportunity for immersion and learning. He observed the legislative process with a meticulous eye, watching how bills were introduced, debated, and eventually passed or defeated. He saw firsthand the intricate dance of compromise and persuasion that defined political life on Capitol Hill. He spent countless hours in the corridors of power, listening to conversations, attending committee hearings, and absorbing the unspoken rules and customs of Washington. He studied the interactions between members of Congress, their staff, and the various lobbyists and advocates who sought to influence policy. This period was, in essence, an intensive, practical education in the mechanics of national governance. Johnson's diligence was notable. He was known for his long hours, his tireless energy, and his commitment to understanding every facet of his work. He sought to not just perform his assigned tasks, but to grasp the broader implications of the political decisions being made around him. This quiet, persistent observation allowed him to map out the intricate networks of power and influence, and to discern the pathways through which ambition could be realized within the federal system. His time as a congressional secretary was a foundational period, laying the groundwork for his own future aspirations and providing him with an invaluable insider's view of the very institution he would one day lead. During his early years in Washington, Lyndon Johnson was not merely an observer. He was a diligent student in the informal Academy of National Politics. Crucially, he found a significant mentor in Speaker Sam Rayburn, a powerful and respected figure from Texas who would become a profound influence on Johnson's developing political philosophy and strategic approach. Rayburn, known for his stern demeanour and deep understanding of congressional mechanics, recognized a spark in the ambitious young secretary. This mentorship was not always explicit or formal. Often it manifested in quiet moments, in shared meals, or in the casual conversations held in the Speaker's office or on the House floor. Johnson absorbed Rayburn's wisdom, learning about the delicate art of legislative manoeuvring, the importance of personal relationships, and the subtle power of knowing when to speak, and perhaps more importantly, when to listen. Rayburn's guidance provided Johnson with an invaluable compass in the complex world of Washington, and Johnson quietly absorbed the intricacies of congressional procedure. He studied the rules of the House, understanding how legislation moved through committees, how votes were counted, and how seemingly minor procedural details could sway the fate of a major bill. This deep understanding of the machinery of government would later become one of his greatest strengths, allowing him to navigate and master the legislative process with unparalleled skill. Beyond the formal rules, he also learned the art of political persuasion. Rayburn embodied a particular style of leadership, firm, fair, and focused on building consensus through personal connection rather than public grandstanding. Johnson watched and learned how Rayburn used his influence, how he built alliances, and how he convinced wavering members to support a particular agenda. These lessons were absorbed without overt fanfare, becoming an intrinsic part of Johnson's own burgeoning political toolkit. He witnessed the power of patience, the necessity of compromise, and the enduring value of loyalty within the political system. Rayburn taught him the importance of keeping one's word and the long-term benefits of building trust. These were not abstract theories, but practical lessons, demonstrated daily in the real-time drama of Congress. Johnson's ability to learn from such a seasoned master, to internalize these complex political dynamics, set him apart from many of his peers. His quiet absorption of these lessons during this formative period laid a robust foundation for the formidable political force he would eventually become. Amidst the bustling political education of Washington, a different, yet equally profound, connection was forming in Lyndon Johnson's life. In the autumn of 1934, while on a brief return to Texas, he was introduced to Claudia Alta Taylor, a young woman from Karnak. She was known to her family and friends by the gentle nickname Lady Bird, a name bestowed upon her by a nursemaid in her childhood, who remarked that she was as pretty as a lady bird. Their meeting was brief, yet impactful. Johnson, known for his persuasive nature and intense focus, immediately perceived in Lady Bird a quiet intelligence and a steady grace that complemented his own driving ambition. He was struck by her calm demeanour and her thoughtful presence, qualities that offered a grounding contrast to the often frenetic pace of his own life. The courtship that followed was remarkably swift, reflecting Johnson's characteristic impulsiveness and his certainty when he found something he truly valued. Within mere weeks of their initial encounter, he proposed marriage. Lady Bird, after careful consideration, accepted his proposal. Their decision to marry so quickly, after knowing each other for such a short time, spoke to a deeper recognition of a fundamental compatibility. Their union, formalized in November of 1934, would prove to be a calm and enduring partnership, one that would sustain them through decades of political life. Lady Bird brought to the marriage a quiet strength, a steadfast loyalty, and a practical intelligence that would become an essential anchor for Johnson. She was a woman of considerable fortitude and grace, possessing an innate ability to support and nurture, without ever seeking the spotlight for herself. Throughout their long life together, Lady Bird would serve as a constant source of encouragement and wisdom. Her presence offered a steadying influence, a calm counterpoint to Johnson's often turbulent and demanding public existence. She understood the sacrifices and the relentless pressures of political life, and she stood beside him, a pillar of quiet support. Their connection, forged in a swift courtship, matured into a profound and lasting bond, underpinning his personal life even as his political career began its inexorable ascent. The marriage of Lyndon B. Johnson and Claudia Alta Lady Bird Taylor took place on November 17th, 1934, in San Antonio, Texas. It was a modest ceremony, reflecting their pragmatic natures and the relatively early stage of Lyndon's career. Yet, this quiet beginning belied the profound and lasting impact their union would have on both their lives and indeed on American history. At its core, their relationship was built upon a foundation of mutual respect and a shared understanding of ambition. While Lyndon was the public face of their political endeavours, Lady Bird was an astute observer and a thoughtful confidant. She possessed a keen intellect and a quiet resilience that perfectly complemented his more assertive and sometimes tempestuous personality. Lady Bird's support was unwavering, providing a stable anchor in what would soon become a tumultuous and demanding career. She understood the intricate dance of politics, the long hours, the constant travel, and the relentless scrutiny. Rather than being deterred by these challenges, she embraced her role, creating a calm and orderly domestic sphere that allowed Lyndon to focus his formidable energies on his public work. She was not merely a passive supporter. Lady Bird was an active partner. She managed their household, nurtured their family, and later, skillfully managed their business interests, demonstrating a shrewd financial acumen that would prove invaluable. Her calm presence often diffused tension, and her thoughtful counsel provided a crucial sounding board for Lyndon's ideas and decisions. Through the dizzying ascent from congressional secretary to president, Lady Bird remained a constant. Her steady disposition and quiet strength provided a sanctuary for Lyndon, a place of peace and unwavering loyalty amidst the often brutal realities of political life. She was his confidant, his partner, and his most steadfast advocate. Her influence a constant, gentle current beneath the powerful waves of his public life. This quiet yet profound partnership would be a defining characteristic of Lyndon Johnson's journey. In 1935, a pivotal opportunity arose for Lyndon Johnson that would further hone his administrative talents and deepen his commitment to public service. He was appointed as the Texas State Director of the National Youth Administration, or NYA. This federal agency, a cornerstone of President Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal, was designed to provide work and educational opportunities for young Americans aged 16 to 25 who were struggling amidst the profound economic despair of the Great Depression. Johnson, at just 26 years old, embraced this role with characteristic vigor. He saw the NYA not merely as a bureaucratic assignment, but as a direct means to alleviate suffering and empower a generation at risk. His work involved creating and overseeing programs that provided vocational training, part-time employment, and educational aid, ensuring that young people could continue their schooling or gain practical skills for future employment. He traveled extensively across the vast state of Texas, establishing connections in every corner, from bustling cities to the most remote rural communities. He personally inspected projects, from building roads and parks to teaching literacy and providing essential community services. His hands-on approach and tireless energy quickly earned him a reputation as an effective and compassionate administrator. This period showcased Johnson's early administrative skills in a profound way. He demonstrated an impressive ability to organize large-scale programs, manage budgets, and motivate diverse groups of people. He built a robust network of local leaders and educators, effectively mobilizing resources to meet the urgent needs of countless young Texans. More than just a testament to his managerial prowess, his tenure at the NYA solidified his commitment to public service. He witnessed firsthand the transformative power of government intervention in addressing societal challenges. The experience reinforced his belief in the importance of creating opportunities for all, particularly for those from disadvantaged backgrounds, a principle that would echo throughout his long political career. It was a formative experience, providing a practical foundation for the grander visions he would later pursue. The year 1937 marked a significant turning point in Lyndon Johnson's trajectory as he embarked upon his first campaign for the U.S. House of Representatives. A special election was called to fill a vacant seat in Texas's 10th congressional district. Despite his relative youth and limited political experience in elected office, Johnson saw an opening and seized it with characteristic ambition. His campaign strategy was both energetic and deeply rooted in the local concerns of the district. He understood that to win, he needed to connect directly with the voters, to listen to their anxieties, and to articulate solutions that resonated with their daily lives. The district, encompassing a diverse mix of agricultural lands and urban areas like Austin, presented a complex electoral landscape. Johnson campaigned relentlessly, often driving his own car from town to town, speaking at crossroads, community halls, and informal gatherings. He shook countless hands, looked voters in the eye, and remembered names and personal stories. His approach was direct and unvarnished, focusing on tangible issues such as rural electrification, agricultural relief, and continued support for President Roosevelt's New Deal programs, which were popular in the district. He conveyed a sense of quiet determination, an inner resolve that projected confidence without arrogance. He was a new face, but one who spoke with the conviction of someone who understood the struggles of ordinary Texans. His past work with the National Youth Administration had given him invaluable insights into the needs of the community and had forged connections that proved beneficial during the campaign. The competition was formidable, with several established political figures vying for the seat. Yet Johnson's tireless efforts, combined with his persuasive communication style and his clear alignment with President Roosevelt, gradually gained traction. When the votes were tallied, Lyndon B. Johnson emerged victorious, a testament to his strategic campaigning and the quiet strength of his appeal. This victory was not merely a personal triumph, but a quiet affirmation of his burgeoning political skill, ushering him onto the national stage. Upon his arrival in Washington as a newly elected congressman in 1937, Lyndon Johnson quickly established himself as a staunch and unwavering supporter of President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his transformative New Deal agenda. This alignment was not merely political expediency. It reflected Johnson's own deeply held convictions about the role of government in alleviating poverty and fostering opportunity, convictions forged during his years in the Hill Country and his time with the NYA. He understood the power of the federal government to bring about meaningful change, particularly in struggling rural areas like his own district. Johnson wasted no time in leveraging his position to secure federal projects and resources for the people he represented. He became a conduit, channeling the vast programs of the New Deal directly into the heart of Texas. One of his most significant early achievements was his tireless advocacy for rural electrification. Many homes and farms in his district still lacked access to electricity, a basic modern convenience that could transform lives and livelihoods. Johnson worked assiduously to bring the benefits of the Rural Electrification Administration, REA, to his constituents. He helped establish local power cooperatives, navigating bureaucratic hurdles and advocating forcefully for funding. Poles were erected, wires were strung, and the quiet hum of electricity began to reach remote communities, illuminating homes and powering machinery for the first time. Beyond electrification, Johnson also championed projects related to conservation and infrastructure. He secured funding for improvements to roads and bridges, which were vital for connecting isolated communities and facilitating commerce. He supported agricultural programs designed to assist farmers grappling with the economic hardships of the era. His effectiveness as a representative was not measured in grand speeches, but in the tangible improvements he brought to the lives of his constituents. Johnson's early years in Congress were characterized by this diligent, results-oriented approach. He was a doer, focused on the practical application of policy to improve conditions on the ground. This period solidified his reputation as a congressman who could deliver, a quiet force working to build a better future for his district under the expansive vision of the New Deal. The serene quietude of congressional life was profoundly disrupted by the distant thunder of war. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, a profound shift occurred across the nation and within Lyndon Johnson himself. Though serving as a congressman, a position that exempted him from military service, Johnson felt a deep personal imperative to contribute more directly to the war effort. He believed it was his duty to actively participate in the defense of his country. Driven by this conviction, he made the decision to enlist in the United States Navy. This was a notable and somewhat unusual step for a sitting member of Congress. He was commissioned as a lieutenant commander, and his initial assignments involved inspections and liaison work within the military. However, his desire for a more active role led him to seek a posting in the Pacific Theatre, where the conflict was most intense. In the spring of 1942, Johnson was deployed to Australia. There, he was tasked with observing and reporting on the conditions and effectiveness of military operations. It was during this period that he experienced direct combat. He was assigned as an observer on a B-26 bomber during an inspection mission over Japanese-held New Guinea. The mission, intended to assess the effectiveness of American bombing raids, suddenly encountered unexpected enemy resistance. The aircraft came under fire from Japanese fighter planes, and Johnson's plane was forced to turn back, suffering damage. This brief, intense encounter provided him with a first-hand understanding of the perils faced by American servicemen in the Pacific. For his participation in this mission, and for his contributions to the war effort, Johnson was awarded the Silver Star by General Douglas MacArthur. The citation acknowledged his gallantry in action and his utter disregard for his own safety. However, Johnson's time in active military service was relatively brief. President Franklin D. Roosevelt, recognizing the importance of maintaining a strong and experienced legislative body during wartime, issued an order in July 1942 recalling all members of Congress then serving in the armed forces back to their legislative duties. Roosevelt believed that their work in Washington was essential for the successful prosecution of the war. Thus, Lyndon Johnson returned from the Pacific, having experienced a brief but significant interlude of military service, forever marked by his first-hand exposure to the realities of combat. He resumed his congressional responsibilities, now with an even deeper understanding of the sacrifices being made by American service members around the world. Upon his return to the halls of Congress from the brief, intense interlude of wartime service, Lyndon Johnson found himself navigating a subtly altered political landscape. The war years had undeniably changed the nation, and the cessation of hostilities brought forth new challenges and opportunities for those within the legislative branch. Johnson, now a seasoned congressman, began to solidify his position and expand his influence within this evolving environment. The immediate post-war period was marked by a gradual shift from the all-consuming focus on global conflict to domestic reconstruction and the nascent anxieties of the Cold War. The robust New Deal coalition, which had defined much of the previous decade, began to show signs of internal strain. Johnson, ever pragmatic and keenly attuned to the currents of power, understood the necessity of adapting to these new realities. He continued to champion issues beneficial to his Texas constituents, but his perspective broadened, encompassing national and international concerns. He devoted himself with renewed intensity to the legislative process, meticulously learning its intricacies, its unwritten rules, and the art of persuasion that lay at its heart. His mentor, Speaker Sam Rayburn, continued to guide him, imparting invaluable lessons on the leverage points of power and the delicate balance required for effective governance. Johnson's natural gregariousness and his relentless drive allowed him to cultivate relationships across the political spectrum, building a network of allies and understanding potential adversaries. Within the Democratic Party, Johnson began to strategically position himself. He was a Southerner, yet his New Deal allegiances distinguished him from the more conservative wing of the party. He possessed a unique ability to bridge divides, to speak the language of both rural constituents and the burgeoning urban centres. He avoided rigid ideological labels, preferring instead to focus on practical outcomes and the accumulation of legislative power. His growing influence was not merely a matter of personality. It was rooted in a profound understanding of legislative mechanics and an unparalleled capacity for hard work. He immersed himself in committee work, demonstrating a mastery of policy details and an ability to forge consensus. Slowly, steadily, Lyndon Johnson was weaving himself into the very fabric of the House of Representatives, laying the groundwork for the more prominent leadership roles that lay ahead. The post-war era, with its complexities and transformations, provided fertile ground for his ambition and his expanding political prowess. The year 1948 brought with it a pivotal moment in Lyndon Johnson's trajectory, a highly contentious race for a seat in the United States Senate. This election would become one of the most talked about and controversial in Texas history, forever etched into the narrative of his rise to power. Johnson, having served 11 years in the House, saw the Senate as the next logical step, a chamber of greater prestige and broader influence. His primary opponent was Coke Stevenson, a former Texas governor, a figure of considerable popularity and an established political presence, known for his folksy charm and perceived integrity. The contest was fiercely fought, marked by extensive travel across the vast state of Texas, as countless speeches and a relentless push for every possible vote. Johnson, with his characteristic energy, campaigned tirelessly, utilizing airplanes to cover more ground than any candidate before him, a strategy that earned him the nickname Lyndon's Flying Windmill. As Election Day drew to a close, the early returns indicated a victory for Stevenson. However, as more precincts reported, particularly from rural South Texas, The margin began to narrow. The final tally, after days of anxious waiting, showed Johnson winning by an extraordinarily slim margin of just 87 votes, out of nearly 1 million cast. This incredibly narrow victory quickly became shrouded in controversy, earning it the enduring moniker of Landslide Lyndon, often spoken with a knowing cynicism. Allegations of voter fraud, and particularly concerning late-arriving ballot boxes from Jimwells County, known as Box 13, immediately surfaced. These ballots, which appeared after Stevenson had seemingly won, contained votes that overwhelmingly favoured Johnson, turning the tide in his favour. Legal challenges ensued, reaching even the Supreme Court before ultimately being dismissed. The outcome stood. The 1948 Senate race highlighted the complex and sometimes opaque nature of political power, particularly in the mid-20th century South. For Johnson, it was a hard-won victory that propelled him into the Senate, but it also cast a long shadow, fueling questions and speculation that would follow him for decades. Regardless of the controversy, the result was clear. Lyndon B. Johnson was now a United States Senator, his journey continuing to ascend. With the contentious 1948 election behind him, Lyndon Johnson embarked upon a new chapter in his political life, entering the United States Senate. This upper chamber was a profoundly different arena from the House of Representatives, where he had honed his legislative skills. The Senate was smaller, more deliberative, and steeped in traditions that valued seniority, decorum, and individual power. Upon his arrival, Johnson initially adopted a posture of quiet observation. He understood that the Senate operated on a different rhythm, one that required patience and a careful study of its intricate mechanisms. He watched the powerful figures who dominated the chamber, men like Richard Russell of Georgia, the formidable leader of the Southern Bloc, and Styles Bridges of Louisiana, a master of legislative strategy. He absorbed their methods, their alliances, and their unspoken rules. Unlike the House, where a newcomer could make a name relatively quickly through sheer force of personality or advocacy, the Senate demanded a deeper understanding of its subtle currents. Influence was built incrementally, through trust, through favours, and through a meticulous grasp of parliamentary procedure. Johnson, ever the student of power, immersed himself in this new environment. He spent hours in the cloakrooms, engaging in quiet conversations, listening more than he spoke, gathering intelligence, and beginning to weave the intricate web of relationships that would define his Senate career. He recognized that the power in the Senate resided not just in formal titles, but in the ability to persuade, to compromise, and to manage the legislative process from behind the scenes. It was a place where individual senators held immense sway, where a single objection could halt a bill, and where consensus was often painstakingly forged. Johnson, with his keen political instincts, began to adapt, understanding that his previous methods, while effective in the House, would need refinement in this new, more stately and often more resistant legislative body. He was learning to navigate a new landscape, preparing for the influence he would eventually wield. Lyndon Johnson's ascent in the Senate was remarkably swift, a testament to his unparalleled understanding of power and persuasion. By 1955, after just 7 years in the chamber, he had become the Senate Majority Leader, a position of immense influence. This rapid rise was not merely due to seniority, but to a unique and often relentless approach to legislative leadership. Johnson possessed an extraordinary ability to build consensus, even among deeply divided factions. He understood that every senator had motivations, vulnerabilities, and aspirations. He meticulously studied each member, learning their backgrounds, their constituents' needs, and their personal ambitions. This intimate knowledge formed the bedrock of his persuasive strategies, His legendary Johnson treatment became a hallmark of his leadership. This was an immersive, often physical form of persuasion where Johnson would invade a senator's personal space, leaning in close, speaking in a low, intense voice, his words a torrent of facts, appeals, threats, and promises. It was an overwhelming experience designed to wear down resistance and elicit agreement. Yet, it was always rooted in his deep understanding of human nature, tailored to the individual he was confronting. Beyond these intense personal encounters, Johnson's legislative strategies were quietly effective. He mastered the art of the legislative calendar, knowing precisely when to introduce a bill, when to delay, and when to call for a vote. He often worked behind the scenes, brokering deals, making concessions, and finding common ground where none seemed to exist. He understood that legislation was not merely about grand principles, but about the tedious, often unglamorous work of counting votes, negotiating amendments, and managing expectations. His leadership transformed the role of majority leader, turning it into a dynamic engine of legislative action, as driven by his tireless energy and his profound insight into the human condition. As Senate Majority Leader, Lyndon Johnson demonstrated a remarkable capacity for steering complex legislation through a deeply divided Congress. Among his most significant achievements were the passage of the Civil Rights Acts of 1957 and 1960. These acts, though limited in scope by later standards, represented foundational steps in the long and arduous struggle for racial equality in the United States. The journey to enact these bills was fraught with political peril. The issue of civil rights had long been a third rail in American politics, particularly within the Democratic Party, which contained both ardent segregationists from the South and progressive voices from the North. Johnson, a Southerner himself, understood these profound schisms better than most. He recognized that a frontal assault on entrenched segregation would likely fail, leading only to further polarization and inaction. Instead, he employed his considerable strategic acumen. For the 1957 Civil Rights Act, Johnson chose a pragmatic approach, carefully negotiating with Southern Democrats while simultaneously appeasing Northern liberals. The act focused primarily on voting rights, establishing a civil rights division within the Justice Department, and empowering federal prosecutors to seek injunctions against those who interfered with the right to vote. It was a modest bill, stripped of stronger provisions, yet it was the first federal civil rights legislation passed since Reconstruction. Its passage was a delicate balancing act, a testament to Johnson's ability to find common ground, however narrow, in a contentious political landscape. 3 years later, the Civil Rights Act of 1960 built upon this groundwork. This subsequent legislation further strengthened federal oversight of voter registration and introduced penalties for obstructing court orders concerning school desegregation. While still incremental, these acts were not insignificant. They established the principle that the federal government had a legitimate role in protecting civil rights and laid the essential legislative framework upon which more comprehensive future reforms could be constructed. Johnson, through careful maneuvering and a deep understanding of the Senate's intricate dynamics, had managed to push through these early crucial measures, setting the stage for the transformative changes that would come in the years ahead. Throughout Lyndon Johnson's formative years in the Senate, the shadow of the Cold War stretched long and wide across the globe, profoundly influencing the domestic and foreign policy landscape of the United States. This era was characterized by a persistent ideological and geopolitical confrontation between the United States and its allies, and the Soviet Union and its satellite states. It was a time of pervasive anxiety, a constant awareness of nuclear capabilities, and a deep-seated fear of communist expansion. This overarching global tension permeated nearly every aspect of American life and governance. Domestic policies were often framed through the lens of national security, whereas with concerns about internal subversion and external threats shaping legislative priorities. Funding for scientific research, education, and infrastructure projects, for instance, frequently found justification in the need to outpace the Soviet Union in technological and military prowess. The space race, the arms race, and the development of intelligence agencies were all direct manifestations of this intense rivalry. In the Senate, debates on foreign aid, defense spending, and international alliances were imbued with a sense of urgency and gravity. The threat of communism was not merely an abstract concept. It was perceived as an existential challenge that demanded vigilance and decisive action. Senators, including Johnson, were continually navigating the delicate balance between projecting strength abroad and maintaining stability at home. The pressures of this era were immense, influencing not only the grand strategies of statecraft, but also the day-to-day legislative work of Congress. Every decision, it seemed, carried the weight of global consequences, shaping the political atmosphere in which Johnson honed his leadership skills and pursued his legislative agenda. The Cold War provided the ever-present backdrop, a quiet hum of tension beneath the surface of all political endeavours. The year 1960 presented Lyndon Johnson with a new political aspiration, the presidency itself. Having mastered the Senate, he sought to extend his influence to the executive branch. Believing his experience and understanding of the legislative process uniquely qualified him for the nation's highest office. However, his bid for the Democratic presidential nomination proved unsuccessful. He faced a formidable challenge from Senator John F. Kennedy of Massachusetts, whose youthful charisma and well-organized campaign resonated strongly with a significant portion of the Democratic electorate. Johnson's campaign, while robust in its own right, struggled to overcome the momentum and appeal of Kennedy, particularly in the critical primary states. Following the Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles, a pivotal moment arrived when John F. Kennedy extended an unexpected offer to Johnson, the vice presidency. This decision was rooted in shrewd political calculus. Kennedy, a Northern Catholic, he needed to balance the ticket geographically and ideologically. Johnson, a Protestant from Texas, represented the southern wing of the Democratic Party and possessed unparalleled experience in Congress. His presence on the ticket was seen as crucial for securing Southern votes, bridging the regional divide, and appealing to a broader base of voters, particularly those who might have been wary of a young liberal Catholic from the Northeast. Johnson accepted, a choice that marked a significant transition from his position of immense power as Senate Majority Leader to the more circumscribed role of Vice President. As Vice President, his duties shifted from direct legislative leadership to supporting the President's agenda. He undertook various assignments, including diplomatic missions abroad and leading efforts on specific domestic programs. While he remained a powerful figure within the administration, the vice presidency inherently carried less direct authority than his previous Senate leadership. Nevertheless, his deep understanding of Congress and his established relationships within the legislative body proved invaluable to the new administration as it sought to navigate the complexities of governance. Lyndon Johnson's experience as vice president under John F. Kennedy was for him a period of significant adjustment and often quiet frustration. Having wielded immense power as Senate Majority Leader, shaping legislation, and influencing the very direction of the nation's domestic policy, the vice presidency presented a stark contrast. His previous role had been one of constant engagement, strategic maneuvering, and direct impact on the legislative process. Now he found himself in a position largely defined by its supportive nature, a role designed to complement the president rather than lead independently. The Kennedy administration was characterized by a youthful energy and a new guard, often perceived as distant from Johnson's more traditional old-school political style. While he was included in cabinet meetings and played a role in various initiatives, the direct authority and legislative sway he once commanded were largely absent. This shift was not merely a matter of title, but of fundamental function. The Vice President, by constitutional design, holds limited independent power, serving primarily as the President's understudy and a ceremonial figure. For a man of Johnson's ambition and drive, accustomed to being at the epicenter of political action, this less prominent position was a profound change. He undertook important assignments, such as leading the Space Council and chairing the President's Committee on Equal Employment Opportunity, and travelled extensively on diplomatic missions. These roles were significant, yet they did not offer the same direct legislative power or daily influence over domestic policy that he had exercised in the Senate. Johnson, ever the astute observer, spent these years quietly watching, learning the intricacies of the executive branch and patiently enduring the sometimes subdued nature of his position. He understood the political realities and the necessity of his role on the ticket. Beneath the surface of his public demeanour, there was an underlying sense of a powerful force held in check, a strategic mind absorbing lessons, waiting for a different moment to emerge. His time as vice president, while perhaps personally challenging, allowed him to observe the presidency from within, gaining insights that would prove invaluable in the unforeseen future. The 22nd of November, 1963, dawned as a bright, clear day in Dallas, Texas. President John F. Kennedy, accompanied by his wife Jacqueline, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, and Lady Bird Johnson, was on a political trip through the state. The motorcade moved slowly through the streets, greeted by enthusiastic crowds. Then, in an instant, the tranquility was shattered. Shots rang out, echoing through Dealey Plaza. Lyndon Johnson, riding in the second car behind the president, was immediately pushed down by Secret Service agents. The profound shock of the moment was palpable. Confusion quickly gave way to a chilling realization as the motorcade sped to Parkland Memorial Hospital. Inside the hospital, the news was delivered with a devastating clarity. President Kennedy was dead. The nation, and indeed the world, was stunned into disbelief and profound grief. For Johnson, the immediate aftermath was a whirlwind of sorrow, duty, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. A vacuum had been created at the very top of the American government, and the continuity of leadership was paramount. He was swiftly ushered to Love Field, where Air Force One awaited. Aboard the presidential plane, under the most sombre of circumstances, the constitutional transfer of power would take place. At 2:38 p.m. Central Standard Time, in the cramped confines of the presidential cabin with Jacqueline Kennedy standing beside him, still wearing her blood-stained suit, Lyndon B. Johnson raised his right hand. Federal Judge Sarah T. Hughes administered the oath of office. The words were familiar, yet the weight they carried in that moment was immense. There was no pomp, no ceremony, only the quiet, urgent necessity of a nation in crisis. A photograph, taken in haste, captured the solemnity. Johnson's face etched with grief and determination, flanked by Lady Bird and the newly widowed First Lady. With that quiet utterance, Lyndon B. Johnson became the 36th President of the United States, thrust into the nation's highest office by an act of unthinkable violence, inheriting a country steeped in sorrow and uncertainty. The flight back to Washington, D.C. dimmed, yet it was a journey shrouded in a profound quietness, marked by the heavy weight of an unexpected transition. Lyndon Johnson, now president, carried the immense burden of a nation in mourning, a country suddenly adrift without its youthful leader. The immediate challenges were daunting. To reassure a shocked populace, to maintain stability in government, and to project strength and continuity to the world. He understood that his immediate task was not to forge a new path, but to steady the ship and to honour the legacy of the man he succeeded. There was a deep-seated resolve within him to continue President Kennedy's work, particularly his legislative agenda. Johnson recognised the vital importance of demonstrating that the government remained functional, even in the throes of such a devastating loss. Upon arrival at Andrews Air Force Base, the sight of the flag-draped casket being lowered from Air Force One underscored the gravity of the moment. Johnson's first public remarks as president were delivered with a quiet strength, emphasising unity and the unwavering commitment to the nation's purpose. He spoke of healing, of continuity, and of fulfilling the dreams that had been articulated by his predecessor. The transition from vice president to president was not merely a change of title, it was a profound shift in responsibility, an instantaneous elevation to the ultimate decision-making role. Johnson, known for his relentless energy and his mastery of legislative process, now faced the executive branch, an intricate machinery that required both immediate command and long-term vision. He had inherited a complex array of domestic challenges and the ongoing pressures of the Cold War. Yet, through the grief and the shock, there was a quiet determination within him to meet this moment, to guide the nation forward, and to uphold the trust unexpectedly placed upon his shoulders. Just 5 days after the assassination, on November 27, 1963, President Johnson addressed a joint session of Congress. The nation was still reeling, a collective grief palpable in the air, and the eyes of the world watched closely for a sign of stability. Johnson's address was a masterclass in quiet reassurance, a steady hand extended to a shaken nation. He began by acknowledging the profound loss, honouring the memory of John F. Kennedy with deep reverence. His voice, though still touched by sorrow, conveyed a firm resolve. So the central theme of his speech was continuity and unity. He recognised that in such a moment of crisis, the country needed to feel grounded, to believe that its institutions would endure. A significant portion of his address was dedicated to President Kennedy's legislative agenda, particularly the Civil Rights Act. Johnson understood the symbolic power of this moment. He declared, with quiet conviction, that the most fitting memorial to President Kennedy would be the swift passage of this crucial legislation. Having shepherded the Civil Rights Acts of 1957 and 1960 through Congress as Senate Majority Leader, Johnson possessed a unique understanding of the complexities and the moral imperative behind such a bill. He knew the resistance it would face, but also the profound impact it could have. He urged Congress, and indeed the entire nation, to set aside partisan differences and to work together for the common good. His appeal for unity transcended political lines, reaching out to a public yearning for guidance and stability. The address was not a call for radical change, but rather a quiet affirmation of existing commitments, a solemn promise to fulfill the aspirations that had been set forth before the tragedy. It was a speech designed to calm fears, to mend divisions, and to provide a sense of purpose in a time of deep uncertainty. Through his words, Johnson began to weave a narrative of perseverance, positioning himself as the steward of a shared national destiny, committed to advancing the unfinished work of his predecessor. The quiet commitment expressed in Johnson's first address to Congress quickly transformed into relentless action. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, a bill that had languished in legislative limbo, became the immediate focus of his presidency. This was not merely a matter of political will, but a profound moral obligation, one that Johnson embraced with all the force of his decades of legislative experience. He understood the intricate workings of Congress like few others. His time as Senate Majority Leader had honed his skills in negotiation, persuasion, and strategic maneuvering. Now, as President, he deployed these abilities with unwavering determination. He engaged in countless private conversations, making phone calls late into the night, meeting with reluctant senators and congressmen, cajoling, reasoning, and, when necessary, applying pressure. He appealed to conscience, to patriotism, and to the legacy of the fallen president. The opposition was fierce and deeply entrenched. Southern Democrats mounted a formidable filibuster in the Senate, determined to prevent the bill's passage. The debates were long and arduous, stretching over weeks, testing the resolve of proponents. Yet Johnson remained steadfast. He worked closely with civil rights leaders, building a broad coalition of support. He understood that the bill's success hinged on bipartisan cooperation, particularly from moderate Republicans. Finally, after months of intense legislative struggle, the filibuster was broken. On July 2, 1964, President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law in a quiet ceremony at the White House. This monumental piece of legislation outlawed discrimination based on race, color, religion, sex, or national origin, of effectively ending segregation in public places and banning employment discrimination. It was a quiet triumph of justice, a profound reordering of American society. For Johnson, it was the culmination of a long journey, a testament to his belief in the fundamental equality of all citizens and a deeply personal achievement that reshaped the nation's future. With the Civil Rights Act secured, President Johnson turned his attention to an even broader, more encompassing vision for America. He began to articulate what he termed the Great Society. This was not merely a collection of legislative proposals, but a grand philosophical framework born from his personal experiences with poverty and his deep-seated belief in the potential of government to improve lives. The Great Society was built upon three core tenets. First, it sought to end poverty in America. Johnson believed that in a nation of such abundance, no citizen should be left behind in destitution. This aim was deeply rooted in his memories of the Great Depression and the struggles faced by families in rural Texas, experiences that instilled in him a profound empathy for the disadvantaged. Second, the vision aimed to eliminate racial injustice, to move beyond the legal dismantling of segregation towards true equality of opportunity and dignity for all Americans. The passage of the Civil Rights Act was a crucial first step, but Johnson recognized that systemic inequalities required further, sustained effort. Third, and perhaps most expansively, the Great Society aspired to create a richer quality of life for every American. This extended beyond basic needs to encompass the environment, education, i.e. healthcare, and the arts. It envisioned a society where urban centres were revitalised, where natural beauty was preserved, where every child had access to quality schooling, and where the elderly and vulnerable were cared for. It was a vision of progress that measured success not just in economic growth, but in human flourishing and communal well-being. This grand aspiration, while sweeping in its scope, remained deeply human at its core. It reflected Johnson's conviction that government had a moral responsibility to uplift its citizens, to expand opportunity, and to foster a society where every individual could reach their full potential. The Great Society was, in essence, an invitation to the nation to build a more just, more beautiful, and more compassionate future, a future where the promise of America was accessible to all. Having navigated the profound grief of a nation and secured the landmark Civil Rights Act, Lyndon Johnson faced the 1964 presidential election. He sought not merely to win, but to gain a clear mandate from the American people for the ambitious domestic agenda he had begun to articulate. His opponent was Senator Barry Goldwater of Arizona, a conservative whose platform offered a stark contrast to Johnson's expansive vision. The campaign presented the American electorate with a distinct choice regarding the role of government and the direction of the nation. Johnson, campaigning on the promise of the Great Society, advocated for federal action to address social and economic inequalities, to protect civil rights, and to enhance the quality of life for all. Goldwater, conversely, championed a philosophy of limited government, near individual liberty, and a strong national defense, often expressing skepticism about the efficacy of large-scale federal programs. As the election unfolded, the public largely embraced Johnson's message of progress and social uplift. The memory of Kennedy's assassination, coupled with Johnson's steady leadership in the intervening months, fostered a sense of continuity and reassurance. His legislative successes, particularly the Civil Rights Act, demonstrated his capacity to deliver on his promises. When the votes were tallied in November 1964, the outcome was a decisive victory for Lyndon Johnson. He won by an overwhelming margin, securing over 61% of the popular vote and carrying 44 states and the District of Columbia. This landslide represented one of the largest popular vote majorities in American presidential history. And this resounding triumph provided President Johnson with a powerful mandate. It was a clear signal from the American people that they supported his vision for a great society and entrusted him with the authority to pursue his domestic agenda with vigor. Armed with this electoral affirmation, Johnson was poised to embark upon one of the most transformative periods of social legislation in the nation's history, confident in the public's backing for his ambitious programs aimed at reshaping American life. With the significant mandate from the 1964 election, President Johnson turned his attention fully to the implementation of his Great Society vision, most notably initiating the War on Poverty. This ambitious undertaking was formally launched with the passage of the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964, a comprehensive piece of legislation designed to attack poverty on multiple fronts. The Economic Opportunity Act established a range of programs aimed at empowering individuals and communities. It created the Office of Economic Opportunity, OEO, to administer these initiatives, which sought to provide education, job training, and community development resources to those living in destitution. Among its many provisions were programs like the Job Corps, offering vocational training for young people, and Volunteers in Service to America, VISTA, a domestic peace corps dedicated to serving impoverished areas. One of the most enduring and impactful initiatives to emerge from the war on poverty was Head Start. Conceived as a summer program in 1965, Head Start provided comprehensive early childhood education, health, nutrition, and parent involvement services to low-income children and their families. Its quiet, profound impact lay in offering foundational support during the critical early years, aiming to break cycles of disadvantage before they could fully take root. Beyond these direct anti-poverty measures, Johnson's Great Society also brought forth transformative changes in healthcare. In 1965, Congress passed legislation establishing Medicare and Medicaid. Medicare provided health insurance for Americans aged 65 and older, while Medicaid offered healthcare assistance to low-income individuals and families. These programs fundamentally altered the landscape of healthcare access in the United States, extending a safety net to millions who had previously lacked adequate medical coverage. These initiatives, Nasataki, from the educational support of Head Start to the healthcare security offered by Medicare and Medicaid, began to quietly reshape individual lives across the nation. For countless elderly citizens, Medicare meant access to necessary medical care without the spectre of financial ruin. For impoverished families, Medicaid provided essential health care for their children. And for young minds in underserved communities, Head Start offered a brighter beginning, a chance to enter school with greater readiness, fostering a sense of opportunity that had long been elusive. These programs, in their quiet operation, began to weave a new fabric of social support, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen. While the Civil Rights Act of 1964 addressed public accommodation and employment discrimination, the fundamental right to vote remained systematically obstructed for many African Americans, particularly in the southern states. The year 1965 brought this injustice into sharp focus through a series of peaceful protest marches in Selma, Alabama. These demonstrations, advocating for voting rights, were met with brutal violence, drawing national and international attention to the plight of black citizens seeking to exercise their constitutional franchise. The images of peaceful marchers being attacked by state troopers deeply disturbed the nation and moved President Johnson to act with conviction. On March 15, 1965, he delivered a powerful and deeply personal speech to a joint session of Congress, urging them to pass new voting rights legislation. In a moment of profound resonance, Johnson invoked the anthem of the civil rights movement, declaring, "We shall overcome." His address underscored the moral imperative of ensuring that every American, regardless of race, had unfettered access to the ballot box. Johnson's unwavering commitment, coupled with the national outcry following the events in Selma, created an irresistible momentum for change. Congress responded by passing the Voting Rights Act of 1965. This landmark legislation outlawed discriminatory voting practices adopted in many southern states, including literacy tests and poll taxes, which had long been used to disenfranchise black voters. It also mandated federal oversight of elections in areas with a history of discrimination. The signing of the Voting Rights Act on August 6, 1965, marked a deeply significant moment in American history, yet it was a profound step towards fulfilling the promise of democracy for all citizens, dismantling barriers that had persisted for nearly a century since the end of the Civil War. This act did not merely grant a right, it secured the very foundation of democratic participation, allowing millions of previously marginalized Americans to finally cast their votes and have their voices heard in the political process, fundamentally reshaping the electorate and the nation's future. Beyond the foundational civil rights legislation and the expansion of social welfare programs, President Johnson's Great Society vision also extended to a profound re-evaluation of who could enter America's borders. For decades, the nation's immigration policy had been governed by the Immigration Act of 1924, which established a national origins quota system. This system severely restricted immigration from Asia and Africa and heavily favoured immigrants from Northern and Western Europe, reflecting deeply embedded biases about national identity and racial hierarchy. It was a policy that had, for generations, shaped the demographic makeup of the United States in a very specific and often exclusionary way. In 1965, building upon the momentum of the civil rights movement, a quiet but equally revolutionary change began to unfold. President Johnson recognized that a truly just society could not maintain such discriminatory immigration policies. With the support of key congressional leaders, the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 was passed. This transformative legislation abolished the restrictive national origins quota system, is marking a decisive break from decades of racially biased immigration policy. Instead of national origin, the new law prioritized family reunification and skilled labor, aligning immigration policy more closely with the evolving ideals of equality and opportunity. While not immediately apparent in its full scope, This act initiated a fundamental reshaping of American society. It opened the doors to immigrants from diverse parts of the world, particularly from Asia, Latin America, and Africa, who had previously been largely excluded. The long-term effects of the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 would be immense. Over the ensuing decades, it led to a dramatic increase in the diversity of the American population, introducing new cultures, languages, and perspectives that enriched the national fabric. This quiet revolution in immigration policy profoundly altered the demographic landscape of the United States, transforming its understanding of itself as a nation of immigrants. It was a testament to the Great Society's expansive ambition, reaching beyond domestic social issues to redefine America's global identity and its commitment to a more inclusive future. As the ambitious domestic agenda of the Great Society unfolded, bringing about significant social transformation, a distant conflict began to assert its presence more forcefully, gradually casting a long and darkening shadow over these achievements. The nation of Vietnam, divided and embroiled in a protracted struggle, had been a concern for American presidents since the Eisenhower administration. The underlying geopolitical factors were complex and rooted in the Cold War's broader ideological struggle against communism and the long history of French colonialism in Southeast Asia. Under President Kennedy, American involvement had primarily been advisory, providing military aid and sending a limited number of military advisors to support the South Vietnamese government against the Communist North. However, the situation on the ground was increasingly volatile and uncertain. Upon assuming the presidency, Lyndon Johnson inherited this evolving commitment, and with it, a series of difficult choices. The perceived threat of communist expansion, often articulated through the domino theory, the idea that if one nation fell to communism, others in the region would inevitably follow, weighed heavily on policymakers. In August 1964, the Gulf of Tonkin incidents occurred, as involving alleged attacks on US naval vessels. These events provided the impetus for the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which granted President Johnson broad authority to take all necessary measures to repel any armed attack against US forces and to prevent further aggression. This resolution marked a pivotal moment, paving the way for a significant escalation of American involvement. Throughout 1965 and into 1966, the commitment of US troops steadily increased. What began as an advisory role slowly transformed into a full-scale military intervention, drawing the United States deeper into a conflict that was proving to be far more intractable than initially anticipated. As the number of American soldiers deployed grew, so too did the financial and human cost. Slowly, but inexorably, the war in Vietnam began to demand more and more of the nation's attention, resources and emotional energy, creating growing concerns at home and beginning to overshadow the transformative work of the Great Society. As the American presence in Vietnam deepened and the conflict grew more intense, a profound shift began to occur within the United States itself. The initial public support for the nation's involvement, often rooted in a desire to contain communism, gradually eroded, giving way to widespread skepticism and, eventually, fervent opposition. News reports and images from the battlefield, increasingly graphic and immediate, brought the brutal realities of the war directly into American homes, challenging official narratives and raising difficult questions. The growing dissent manifested in various forms, most visibly through anti-war protests that swelled in size and frequency across college campuses and major cities. These demonstrations, initially small, grew into mass movements, drawing together students, civil rights activists, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens from all walks of life. Chants for peace, calls for troop withdrawal, and critiques of government policy became a constant backdrop to the nation's political discourse. The movement was diverse, encompassing both peaceful protests and, at times, more confrontational actions, reflecting the deep emotional intensity of the opposition. This burgeoning anti-war sentiment created a profound division within the nation. Families found themselves on opposing sides of the debate. Friendships were strained, and the fabric of American society felt increasingly fractured. All the Hawks, who supported the war effort, often clashed with the Doves, who advocated for peace, each side convinced of the righteousness of their cause. This internal struggle was not merely political, it was a deeply personal and moral reckoning for many Americans. For President Johnson, the mounting criticism and public unrest exacted a heavy personal toll. A man deeply sensitive to public opinion, he found himself trapped between the perceived necessity of continuing the war to prevent a communist victory and the growing outcry from a weary populace. He spent countless hours agonizing over military strategies, troop deployments, and the escalating casualty counts. The weight of these decisions, combined with the relentless pressure from both pro-war and anti-war factions, visibly aged him. The joyous energy that had characterized his early presidency, fueled by the successes of the Great Society, was slowly replaced by a somber weariness as the shadow of Vietnam grew longer and more encompassing. The war, which he'd reluctantly inherited, became his defining and most challenging burden. As the year 1968 began, the shadow of the Vietnam War deepened, and the American public had been consistently assured that victory was within reach, that the enemy was weakening. However, this narrative was shattered with dramatic force in late January and early February of that year, during the Vietnamese Lunar New Year, known as Tet. What unfolded was a massive coordinated offensive by North Vietnamese and Viet Cong forces against numerous targets across South Vietnam, including major cities and provincial capitals. The scale and surprise of the Tet offensive were unprecedented. While American military intelligence had anticipated some activity, the widespread nature of the attacks caught both US and South Vietnamese forces largely off guard. Viet Cong commandos even breached the walls of the US embassy in Saigon, creating a scene of chaos and intense fighting in what was considered the symbolic heart of American power in Vietnam. Though these particular infiltrators were ultimately repelled, the image of enemy forces inside the embassy compound resonated deeply. Militarily, the Tet offensive was, in many respects, a costly defeat for the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong. They suffered heavy casualties, and their objective of sparking a general uprising among the South Vietnamese population did not materialize. However, the psychological impact of the offensive on the American public was devastating. For months, official reports had painted a picture of progress, of an enemy on the brink of collapse. The Tet offensive starkly contradicted this optimistic portrayal. If the enemy was so weak, how could they launch such a widespread and intense attack? The vivid television footage and newspaper photographs of fierce fighting in urban centres, of American soldiers battling within the embassy grounds, created a profound sense of disillusionment. The credibility gap between official statements and the perceived reality on the ground widened considerably. The public's trust in the government's handling of the war, already faltering, plummeted further. Many began to question not only the strategy, but the very possibility of achieving a clear victory. The Tet offensive thus marked a critical turning point in the Vietnam War. It solidified public opinion against the conflict, convincing many that the war was unwinnable, or at the very least far from over. This shift in perception would have profound consequences, not only for the trajectory of the war itself, but also for the political landscape in Washington and the future of President Johnson's administration. The hope for a swift resolution faded, replaced by a pervasive sense of stalemate and growing despair. Amidst the escalating war abroad and the growing disillusionment at home, the mid to late 1960s also witnessed a period of intense domestic turmoil within the United States. Cities across the nation became stages for widespread urban riots and social unrest, reflecting deep-seated grievances that had long simmered beneath the surface of American society. These disturbances were not singular events, but rather a complex interplay of various factors. At their core lay persistent racial tensions. Despite the landmark civil rights legislation passed under President Johnson, many African American communities continued to face systemic discrimination in housing, employment, and education. The promise of equality, while legally enshrined, often felt distant from the daily realities of life in segregated neighborhoods. Economic disparities further exacerbated these frustrations. High rates of poverty and unemployment in urban centers, particularly among minority populations, fueled a sense of hopelessness and injustice. The Great Society programs, though ambitious, faced the immense challenge of addressing decades of neglect and structural inequality, and their impact was not felt quickly or universally enough to quell the rising tide of discontent. The Vietnam War also played a significant, if indirect, role in fueling this unrest. The war diverted vast financial resources that many believed could have been better spent on domestic improvements. Moreover, the disproportionate number of young African American men serving and dying in Vietnam while simultaneously facing discrimination at home added another layer of bitterness and resentment. The call for equal rights at home rang hollow to many who felt their sacrifice abroad was not matched by justice within their own country. From Watts in Los Angeles in 1965 to Newark and Detroit in 1967, and numerous other cities, these riots often erupted following incidents of police brutality or other perceived injustices, quickly escalating into widespread destruction and confrontations. The images of burning buildings and National Guard troops patrolling American streets deeply disturbed the nation, forcing a stark confrontation with the profound social divisions that persisted despite outward appearances of prosperity and progress. The nation grappled with understanding these explosions of anger, seeking to comprehend the underlying causes of such widespread upheaval. The year 1968, already burdened by the weight of war and domestic unrest, descended into an even deeper profound sorrow, with two shocking assassinations that further fractured the American spirit. These tragic events occurred at a moment when the nation was already struggling to find its footing, adding immense pressure to a presidency already strained to its limits. On April 4, 1968, the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., a towering figure in the civil rights movement, was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. His death sent shockwaves across the nation and around the world. King, who had tirelessly advocated for nonviolent change and racial equality, was a moral compass for millions. His assassination ignited a fresh wave of grief and outrage, leading to further riots in over 100 cities across the United States. The dreams of peaceful integration and racial harmony that he had so eloquently articulated seemed to recede further into the distance, leaving a void that felt almost impossible to fill. President Johnson, deeply affected by King's death, urged calm and swiftly signed the Civil Rights Act of 1968, also known as the Fair Housing Act, a legislative effort he had long championed into law just days later. It was a somber and necessary response to the profound loss, yet it could not erase the sorrow or the renewed sense of division. Just 2 months later, as the nation was still reeling from King's death, another devastating blow struck. On June 5, 1968, Senator Robert F. Kennedy, a leading Democratic presidential candidate and a beacon of hope for many, was assassinated in Los Angeles, California, shortly after winning the California primary. Kennedy, the younger brother of the late President John F. Kennedy, had emerged as a powerful voice for civil rights and poverty alleviation, and had also become a prominent critic of the Vietnam War. His campaign had energized a broad coalition of disaffected Americans, offering a vision of national healing and reconciliation. His sudden death extinguished that hope for many, plunging the nation into a renewed sense of despair and vulnerability. These twin tragedies left an indelible mark on the American psyche. They stripped away two vital leaders who had offered different, yet equally compelling paths forward for a deeply troubled nation. For Lyndon B. Johnson, these assassinations compounded the already unbearable weight of his presidency. Each loss amplified the sense of a country in crisis, further eroding the national confidence and deepening the divisions that permeated American society. The year 1968 would forever be remembered as a period of profound national grief and an intensifying crucible of American history. The relentless pressures of the presidency, particularly the escalating conflict in Vietnam and the profound domestic unrest, had exacted a heavy toll on Lyndon B. Johnson. By early 1968, the once robust and energetic leader appeared visibly weary, his face etched with the burdens of office. The optimistic spirit that had launched the Great Society programs now seemed overshadowed by the intractable problems that consumed his administration. The public approval ratings, once soaring, had plummeted, reflecting the deep national dissatisfaction with the direction of the country. The constant criticism, the protests, the perceived stalemate in Southeast Asia, and the fracturing of American society had created an almost unbearable emotional and physical strain. Johnson had poured his immense energy into the presidency, driven by a profound sense of duty and a desire to improve the lives of ordinary Americans. However, the sheer weight of these challenges, coupled with a deep personal introspection, led him to a quiet yet impactful decision. On the evening of March 31st, 1968, during a televised address to the nation primarily focused on the Vietnam War, President Johnson made an announcement that stunned many. After detailing new efforts to de-escalate the conflict, he concluded his speech with these unexpected words: "I shall not seek, and I will not accept, the nomination of my party for another term as your president." This pronouncement marked a profound turning point. It was a recognition of the immense personal cost of his time in office, and a testament to the deep divisions that had come to define his presidency. The decision was born from a complex mix of factors: a desire to dedicate his remaining time in office to pursuing peace in Vietnam without the distractions of a political campaign, a recognition of the deep schisms within the Democratic Party, and a profound personal exhaustion. He hoped that by removing himself from the electoral contest, he could foster a greater sense of national unity and focus solely on the pressing issues facing the country. The choice not to seek re-election, made amidst such turbulent times, underscored the immense personal sacrifice involved in leading the nation through one of its most challenging periods. It was a quiet acknowledgement of the limits of even the most powerful office when confronted with an unyielding war and a deeply fractured populace. The decision closed a chapter on an era of ambitious domestic reform and intense international conflict, signalling a transition for the nation and a personal retreat for a weary president. Following his momentous decision not to seek re-election, Lyndon Johnson entered the final year of his presidency with a quiet resolve. The turbulent political landscape of 1968 unfolded around him, marked by a contentious presidential campaign and continued national unrest. Yet Johnson, now unburdened by the demands of seeking another term, focused his remaining energy on the pursuit of peace in Vietnam and the orderly functioning of government. The transition period, after the election of Richard Nixon in November 1968, was handled with the customary dignity and professionalism that defines American presidential handovers. Despite the deep political divisions and the personal animosity that had at times characterized the relationship between Johnson and Nixon, the outgoing president ensured a smooth and respectful transfer of power. The institutions of democracy, even in a period of intense national strain, were upheld. As January 1969 approached, the final days of the Johnson administration were marked by a sense of calm reflection. The Oval Office, which had been the epicenter of so much legislative triumph and wartime struggle, would soon belong to another. Johnson signed his last pieces of legislation, held his final cabinet meetings, and prepared to leave the stage of national politics. The powerful, commanding figure who had dominated Washington for decades was preparing for a quieter existence. On January 20th, 1969, the day of the inauguration, then President Johnson and President-elect Nixon rode together to the Capitol. The crowds that lined the parade route were there to witness the beginning of a new administration, but also, in a way, to bid farewell to a president who had served through a uniquely challenging era. After the inauguration ceremony, as Richard Nixon officially took the oath of office, Lyndon B. Johnson quietly departed the Capitol. He boarded a helicopter, then Air Force One, for the journey back to Texas. There was no fanfare, no grand pronouncements, simply a dignified exit. He left behind a legacy of profound legislative achievement and a nation deeply altered by the Vietnam War. His departure was a quiet closing to a presidency that had been anything but quiet, a final act of grace after years of relentless public service. The weight of the office, and the era it encompassed, was now lifted. Upon his return to Texas following the inauguration of Richard Nixon, Lyndon Johnson shed the immense weight of the presidency. He sought refuge and solace at his beloved LBJ Ranch, nestled in the tranquil Texas hill country. This land, which had been a constant throughout his tumultuous political career, now offered a quiet sanctuary from the unrelenting demands of Washington. The transition from the most powerful office in the world to the rhythms of rural life was profound. Johnson, who had thrived on the constant engagement and intricate negotiations of politics, now embraced a different kind of daily existence. He exchanged the formal attire of a president for more comfortable ranch wear, and the urgent dispatches of state for the quiet observations of nature. His desire for a quieter life was genuine. The intense glare of public scrutiny, the endless meetings, and the pervasive anxieties of the Vietnam War had taken a significant toll. At the ranch, he found a measure of peace, reconnecting with the land that had shaped him. He drove his car, sometimes with a drink in hand, observing his cattle, checking fences, and overseeing the various operations of the working ranch. This period also allowed him to deeply reconnect with his family. Lady Bird, his steadfast partner, had long managed the ranch, and their shared life there now took on a renewed intimacy. His daughters and grandchildren were a source of immense joy and comfort. He relished the simple pleasures of family gatherings, away from the complex pressures of his former life. While the world continued to grapple with the issues he had faced, Johnson, for a time, found contentment in the familiar embrace of his home. He had poured his entire being into public service, and now he sought to replenish his spirit in the comforting solitude of the Texas landscape, surrounded by the people and the place that understood him best. This return to the ranch marked the beginning of a new, more reflective chapter in his extraordinary life. Beyond the daily routines of a ranch life, Lyndon Johnson's post-presidency years were also marked by a profound period of reflection and an earnest endeavor to shape his historical narrative. He began the ambitious task of writing his memoirs, a detailed account of his time in office, which would ultimately be published as The Vantage Point: Perspectives of the Presidency, 1963 to 1969. This undertaking was more than a mere recounting of events. It was an attempt to articulate the complex motivations behind his decisions, particularly concerning the Vietnam War and the Great Society. Working tirelessly, often dictating his thoughts and recollections for hours on end, Johnson sought to explain the reasoning and the immense pressures that had guided his actions during one of the most tumultuous periods in American history. He aimed to provide context, to clarify his intentions, and to present his perspective on the critical choices he had made. The process of writing was a solitary, introspective journey. Away from the immediate demands of governance, he could revisit pivotal moments with a different kind of clarity, sifting through memories and documents to construct a coherent narrative. And he understood that his legacy would be debated for generations, and the vantage point was his direct address to that future, a personal testament to his presidency. He often engaged in quiet conversations with historians and former aides, seeking to verify details and to gain additional insights, but the core of the work remained his deeply personal interpretation. He reflected on the monumental legislative victories, the agonizing decisions of war, and the heavy burden of leadership he had carried. There was a palpable desire to be understood, to ensure that the full scope of his efforts and the challenges he faced were accurately represented. Through these memoirs, Johnson sought to offer his own definitive statement, a final opportunity to present his case to the American people and to history, as it was a period of intense intellectual engagement, a quiet but determined effort to secure his place in the annals of time, viewed through his own experienced eyes. As Lyndon Johnson settled into his post-presidential life, a quieter yet persistent struggle began to assert itself, the ongoing decline of his health. His heart condition, a shadow that had loomed over him for many years, notably after a significant heart attack in 1955, began to manifest with increasing frequency and severity. The relentless pace and immense pressures of the presidency had undoubtedly taken a profound physical toll, exacerbating existing vulnerabilities. The quiet solitude of the ranch, while offering respite for his spirit, could not fully mend the weariness etched into his body. Yet the demands of leading a nation through a period of intense division and conflict had exacted a heavy price. There was a visible slowing in his movements, and the robust energy that had characterized his earlier political career began to recede. His doctors closely monitored his condition, and medical interventions became a more regular part of his daily life. Beyond the physical ailments, there were also quiet battles of an emotional nature. The weight of the world which he had carried on his shoulders did not simply dissipate with his departure from office. The criticisms of his presidency, particularly regarding Vietnam, continued to resonate, and while he publicly maintained a stoic demeanour, the lingering echoes of those years undoubtedly contributed to a deep-seated melancholy. He often reflected on the burdens of his office, and the difficult decisions and the personal sacrifices made. These introspective moments, away from the public eye, revealed a man grappling with the complexities of his own legacy and the profound impact of his choices. The relentless strain of the presidency had left an indelible mark, physically and emotionally. In his later years, Johnson faced these challenges with a quiet dignity, surrounded by his family. The active, boisterous figure of his political prime gradually yielded to a more contemplative presence. A man who, having reshaped a nation, was now confronting the natural rhythms of life and the quiet, personal struggles that come with time. His fight for health became a private yet significant aspect of his concluding years. Amidst Lyndon Johnson's post-presidential reflections and health challenges, his wife, Lady Bird Johnson, continued to cultivate her own significant legacy, particularly in the realm of environmentalism. Her commitment to beautification, a cause she passionately championed during her time as First Lady, did not wane after their return to Texas. Instead, it blossomed into a sustained and impactful endeavour. Lady Bird Johnson understood the profound connection between nature and the human spirit, advocating for the preservation of natural landscapes and the enhancement of public spaces. Her efforts extended beyond mere aesthetics, encompassing a deeper understanding of ecological balance and the importance of native flora. She played a pivotal role in the establishment of the National Wildflower Research Centre, later renamed the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Centre, an institution dedicated to the research, conservation, and promotion of native plants. This centre stands as a living testament to her vision and enduring dedication. Her work was characterised by a quiet persistence and a profound belief in the power of individual action to effect change. She continued to serve on various boards and committees related to conservation and environmental protection, lending her voice and influence to causes she held dear. Her legacy is one of gentle yet firm advocacy for the natural world. Beyond her environmental contributions, Lady Bird Johnson also assumed a crucial role in preserving her husband's memory and ensuring the accurate portrayal of his historical significance. She meticulously organised his papers, supported the work of the Lyndon B. Johnson Presidential Library and Museum, and contributed to historical narratives with her own recollections and insights. Her steadfast dedication ensured that the complexities of his life and presidency were carefully documented and made accessible for future generations. Her enduring presence, marked by grace and an unwavering commitment to both nature and history, solidified her place as a figure of quiet strength and lasting influence, a legacy distinct yet intertwined with that of her husband. The quiet solitude of the LBJ Ranch, which had offered a measure of peace in his final years, became the setting for Lyndon Johnson's passing. On January 22, 1973, at the age of 64, the former president succumbed to a heart attack. It was a somber conclusion to a life lived with immense intensity and profound consequence. His health, long compromised by the stresses of public service and a history of heart ailments, had steadily declined since leaving the White House. The news of his death rippled across the nation, evoking a complex mix of sorrow, reflection, and quiet respect. Despite the divisions that had marked his presidency, there was a widespread recognition of his monumental contributions to civil rights and social welfare. Tributes flowed from across the political spectrum, acknowledging the force of his personality and the ambition of his legislative agenda. A period of national mourning followed, marked by solemn ceremonies that honoured his life and service. His body lay in state in the rotunda of the US Capitol, allowing citizens to pay their final respects. The funeral service, held at the National City Christian Church in Washington, D.C., brought together leaders and dignitaries from around the world, a testament to his global impact. Following the services in the Capitol, his remains were transported back to Texas, to the land he loved so deeply. He was laid to rest in the family cemetery on his ranch, beneath the expansive Texas sky, a final return to his roots. The ceremonies were marked by a dignified solemnity, reflecting the gravity of his passing and the weight of his legacy. Notably, Lyndon Johnson's death occurred just 2 days before the signing of the Paris Peace Accords, which formally ended direct American military involvement in the Vietnam War. This timing added a poignant layer to his passing, as the conflict that had so profoundly defined and ultimately overshadowed his presidency reached its official conclusion almost simultaneously with his final breath. It was a quiet yet profound historical synchronicity. In Austin, Texas, on the campus of the University of Texas, stands a monumental structure that serves as a permanent testament to the life and work of Lyndon B. Johnson, the LBJ Presidential Library and Museum. Conceived during his lifetime and dedicated in 1971, this institution was designed not merely as a memorial, but as a living archive, a place where the intricate tapestry of his presidency could be preserved, studied, and understood. The library's imposing architecture, with its clean lines and robust form, reflects the strength and ambition that characterized Johnson's own public service. Within its walls, an extraordinary collection of documents, artifacts, and multimedia materials awaits those seeking to delve into the complexities of the mid-20th century and the decisions that shaped it. Tens of millions of pages of historical documents, including presidential papers, congressional files, and personal correspondence, are meticulously maintained, offering unparalleled access for researchers and scholars. Beyond the archival holdings, the museum component provides a quiet, immersive journey through Johnson's life. Exhibits thoughtfully chronicle his early years in the Texas Hill Country, his rise through the halls of Congress, his unexpected ascension to the presidency, and the transformative, yet turbulent, years that followed. Visitors can encounter replicas of the Oval Office, view artifacts from the Great Society era, and listen to recordings of Johnson's own voice, offering a direct connection to the past. The purpose of the LBJ Presidential Library extends beyond mere exhibition. It functions as a vital center for quiet study and thoughtful reflection. It hosts conferences, public programs, and educational initiatives, fostering dialogue and deeper understanding of American history and the enduring relevance of Johnson's policies. It is a place where one can ponder the immense responsibilities of leadership, the challenges of social change, and the persistent pursuit of a more just society. In its serene environment, the library stands as a lasting repository of a life dedicated to public service, inviting contemplation on the multifaceted legacy of Lyndon B. Johnson. In the immediate aftermath of Lyndon Johnson's presidency and his passing, yet the initial historical assessments of his time in office were often profoundly shaped by the pervasive shadow of the Vietnam War. For many contemporary observers, the costly and divisive conflict became the defining lens through which all of his achievements and failures were viewed. It cast a long, sombre pall over discussions of his legacy, making it exceedingly difficult for historians and the public alike to separate his monumental domestic triumphs from the tragedy unfolding in Southeast Asia. The national mood at the time of his departure from office was one of weariness and division. The profound social unrest, the deep skepticism toward government, and the immense human cost of the war left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness. Consequently, analyses of Johnson's leadership in the early 1970s frequently emphasized the perceived failures of his foreign policy, often overshadowing the ambitious and transformative social legislation he had championed. It was a period when the architect of the Great Society found his vision largely eclipsed by the escalating military involvement he had inherited and expanded. The sheer scale of the domestic reforms, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, Medicare, Medicaid, and the War on Poverty were, for a time, relegated to a secondary position in public discourse. The urgency and emotional weight of the war meant that its impact on American society and its political landscape took precedence in the immediate historical narratives. Historians grappling with Johnson's complex tenure faced the challenge of reconciling these starkly contrasting facets of his leadership. How could a president who had overseen such profound progress in civil rights and social welfare also be the leader who presided over such a deeply unpopular and ultimately unsuccessful war? This fundamental question formed the core of early academic and journalistic examinations, often leading to a focus on the tragic irony of a leader whose domestic vision was so grand, yet whose foreign policy became so consuming. The initial difficulty lay in achieving a balanced perspective, as the immediate pain and division caused by Vietnam made it challenging to fully appreciate the enduring positive impacts of his domestic agenda. Over time, as the immediate passions and divisions of the Vietnam era began to recede, a more nuanced and thorough re-evaluation of the Great Society programs slowly emerged. Historians and policy analysts, with the benefit of hindsight and more comprehensive data, began to look beyond the shadow of the war to assess the tangible, long-term impacts of Johnson's ambitious domestic agenda. This later scrutiny increasingly illuminated the profound and positive effects these initiatives had on American society. The war on poverty, though never fully won, demonstrably reduced poverty rates, particularly among the elderly and minority populations. Programs like Medicare and Medicaid, initially controversial, became cornerstones of the nation's healthcare system, providing essential medical coverage to millions who previously lacked access. Their establishment marked a significant expansion of the social safety net, fundamentally altering the landscape of American healthcare provision. Furthermore, the Great Society's emphasis on education, through programs like Head Start and federal aid to elementary and secondary schools, yielded significant benefits, particularly for disadvantaged children. These initiatives aimed to break cycles of poverty by investing in early childhood development and improving educational opportunities across the board. The long-term data revealed improvements in literacy rates, educational attainment, and overall social mobility for many who participated in these programs. The civil rights legislation, though distinct from the Great Society's anti-poverty measures, was inextricably linked to its broader vision of a more equitable society. The Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act began to dismantle systemic discrimination, opening doors to political participation and economic opportunity for African Americans and other marginalized groups. The effects of these legislative victories, combined with the Great Society's social programs, gradually fostered a more inclusive and just society. Thus, decades after Johnson left office, the initial skepticism and criticism surrounding the Great Society began to give way to a more widespread recognition of its enduring positive contributions. The programs were increasingly seen not just as idealistic endeavours, but as effective governmental interventions that significantly improved the lives of millions of Americans, fundamentally reshaping the social fabric of the nation for the better. Amidst the intricate tapestry of Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency, one thread remains consistently vibrant and undisputed: his pivotal role as a champion of civil rights. Regardless of the debate surrounding other aspects of his tenure, his commitment to racial equality, culminating in landmark legislation, stands as an enduring and transformative legacy. The Civil Rights Act of 1964, signed into law with Johnson's unwavering resolve, irrevocably altered the legal landscape of the United States. This monumental act outlawed discrimination based on race, colour, religion, sex, or national origin, effectively dismantling segregation in public accommodations, employment, and education. It was a legislative earthquake that shattered generations of entrenched racial barriers, opening doors that had long been sealed shut for millions of African Americans and other minority groups. The impact of this single piece of legislation resonated through every facet of American life, from lunch counters to factory floors, from schools to polling booths. Building upon this foundation, the Voting Rights Act of 1965 further solidified Johnson's place in civil rights history. This act directly addressed the systemic disenfranchisement of minority voters, particularly in the southern states, by prohibiting discriminatory voting practices such as literacy tests and poll taxes. It authorized federal oversight of voter registration and elections in areas with a history of discrimination, ensuring that the constitutional right to vote could finally be exercised by all citizens, regardless of their skin color. The immediate effect was dramatic, as millions of previously marginalized citizens registered to vote, are fundamentally reshaping the American political landscape and empowering communities that had long been silenced. These two legislative achievements, enacted within a span of little more than a year, represent a profound moral and legal triumph. They did not merely nudge society forward, they propelled it, securing fundamental freedoms and dignities for millions of Americans. Johnson, with his formidable legislative skills and unwavering determination, transformed the abstract ideals of equality into concrete, enforceable law. His actions ensured that the promise of America, once selectively applied, began to extend more fully to all its citizens, leaving an indelible mark on the nation's journey toward justice. The presidency, at its core, is an office defined by an intricate web of choices, each carrying immense weight and far-reaching consequences. For Lyndon B. Johnson, this inherent complexity was amplified by the tumultuous era in which he served, a period marked by profound social transformation at home and escalating conflict abroad. His leadership unfolded at a crossroads of history, demanding decisions that would shape the nation's trajectory for decades to come. Johnson inherited a nation grappling with the moral imperative of civil rights, a movement that had gained undeniable momentum but still faced fierce resistance. His commitment to legislative action, as evidenced by the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, required immense political will and strategic acumen. He navigated deeply entrenched prejudices and political opposition, employing every tool of persuasion and pressure he possessed to move these historic bills through Congress. These were not easy victories, but rather the culmination of tireless effort and a deep understanding of the legislative process. Simultaneously, the shadow of Vietnam lengthened, casting an increasingly dark pall over his administration. The conflict presented a different kind of challenge, one of international relations, military strategy, and geopolitical calculations. The decisions made regarding the war, from troop deployments to bombing campaigns, were fraught with uncertainty and influenced by a complex array of factors, including Cold War containment policies, domestic political pressures, and the Council of Military and Diplomatic Advisors. Each escalation, each strategic pivot, carried the immense burden of human cost and the potential for wider global instability. To lead during such a time was to confront an almost impossible duality. Johnson sought to build a great society, striving to eradicate poverty and expand opportunities for all Americans, even as the demands of a distant war consumed an ever-increasing share of national resources and attention. The ambition of his domestic agenda often found itself in direct competition with the necessities of foreign policy, creating a constant tension within his administration and within the nation itself. The choices Johnson made, both domestically and internationally, were the product of his beliefs, his experiences, and the counsel he received, all filtered through the lens of a rapidly changing world. To understand his presidency fully is to acknowledge the immense pressures and the conflicting demands that defined his time in office, recognizing the inherent complexities of leadership during an era of extraordinary challenge. Lyndon B. Johnson remains, in the tapestry of American history, a figure woven from threads of distinct and often opposing qualities. He was a man of immense, almost insatiable ambition, driven by a powerful desire to leave an indelible mark on his nation. This ambition fueled his relentless pursuit of political power, his mastery of the legislative process, and his tireless work to enact sweeping social reforms. Yet, this same ambition could at times manifest as an uncompromising will, a characteristic that both propelled his successes and contributed to his later struggles. Beneath the veneer of a formidable political operator lay a deep vein of empathy. Johnson possessed a profound understanding of the struggles faced by ordinary Americans, particularly those living in poverty or marginalized by society. His formative years in rural Texas, marked by periods of scarcity, instilled in him a genuine desire to alleviate suffering and expand opportunity. This empathy was the wellspring for the Great Society programs, a testament to his belief that government could and should be a force for good in the lives of its citizens. He genuinely envisioned a nation where every individual had a fair chance to succeed, regardless of their background. His political genius was undeniable. Johnson possessed an almost supernatural ability to read people, to understand their motivations, and to leverage their weaknesses and strengths to achieve his legislative goals. The Johnson treatment, a blend of charm, intimidation, and relentless persuasion, became legendary on Capitol Hill. He knew how to count votes, how to twist arms, and how to forge unlikely alliances to push through monumental legislation. This legislative brilliance led to the passage of some of the most transformative laws in American history. However, this same political acumen, so effective in the domestic arena, seemed to falter when confronted with the complexities of international conflict. His approach to the Vietnam War, marked by an incremental escalation and a deep-seated fear of appearing weak in the face of communism, ultimately proved to be a profound miscalculation. The strategies that worked so effectively in the corridors of Congress did not translate to the battlefields of Southeast Asia, leading to a deepening quagmire that eroded public trust and divided the nation. Thus, Johnson stands as a testament to the intricate nature of human character and the demanding crucible of leadership. He was a man of towering strengths and undeniable flaws, capable of both extraordinary vision and tragic misjudgment. His legacy is not easily categorized, but rather demands a nuanced understanding of a leader who simultaneously championed progress and grappled with unforeseen consequences, forever a figure of compelling contradictions. Lyndon B. Johnson's place in the grand narrative of 20th century American history is both secure and perpetually under examination. He stands as a towering figure, fundamentally transforming the domestic landscape of the United States in ways that continue to resonate. His vision of a great society was not merely rhetoric. It was a blueprint for a nation striving for greater equity and opportunity for all its citizens. At the core of his enduring legacy are the landmark civil rights achievements. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965 dismantled institutionalized segregation and disenfranchisement, fundamentally altering the fabric of American democracy. These acts did not merely grant rights. They began the arduous process of ensuring their realization, laying the essential groundwork for a more inclusive and just society. Without Johnson's relentless political will and legislative mastery, the pace of racial equality might have been far slower. Beyond civil rights, his ambitious Great Society programs addressed poverty, education, healthcare, and environmental protection. Medicare and Medicaid in particular remain cornerstones of American social welfare, providing essential healthcare access to millions. While the full impact and efficacy of all Great Society initiatives have been subjects of ongoing scholarly debate, their intention to uplift and empower disadvantaged communities is undeniable. They represented a profound expansion of the federal government's role in addressing social ills, a paradigm shift that continues to define public policy discussions. However, any assessment of Johnson's historical standing must also confront the shadow of his foreign policy decisions, most notably the escalation of the Vietnam War. This conflict, which consumed his presidency and deeply divided the nation, remains a source of intense scrutiny and debate. Historians continue to analyze the motivations, strategies, and consequences of his choices in Southeast Asia, with no simple consensus emerging. It is the complex, often tragic counterpoint to his domestic triumphs. Thus, Lyndon B. Johnson is remembered as a transformative domestic president whose profound achievements in civil rights and social welfare laid the essential groundwork for a more inclusive and equitable society. His dedication to improving the lives of ordinary Americans solidified his place as a champion of progress. Yet, the persistent questions surrounding his foreign policy ensure that his legacy, while undeniably impactful, remains a subject of ongoing study and reflection, a testament to the intricate challenges of leading a nation through a tumultuous era. We have gently journeyed through the extensive tapestry of Lyndon B. Johnson's life, from his humble beginnings in the quiet expanse of rural Texas to the pinnacle of presidential power, and finally to the reflective solace of his ranch. It was a life lived with immense energy, driven by a profound ambition and a deep, complex understanding of power and people. We have witnessed the evolution of a young man shaped by the land and the values of his upbringing into a formidable political force. We have explored his ascent through the halls of Congress, observing his mastery of legislative strategy and his extraordinary ability to forge consensus. These early years, often overlooked, were crucial in shaping the leader who would eventually guide the nation through one of its most turbulent periods. His presidency, though tragically commenced, became a crucible of both monumental achievement and profound challenge. The echoes of his decisions, particularly those concerning civil rights and the Great Society, continue to resonate through the very fabric of American society. They speak to an enduring vision of a more just and equitable nation, a testament to his unwavering commitment to progress on the home front. Yet, we have also quietly contemplated the immense weight of the Vietnam War, a conflict that cast a long and somber shadow over his domestic triumphs. It reminds us that leadership, especially at the highest level, often demands choices of unimaginable difficulty, and with consequences that ripple through generations. As the narrative of Lyndon B. Johnson's life now gently recedes, we are left to ponder the enduring impact of his decisions on the very soul of America. His story is a powerful reminder of the intricate interplay between individual will, historical circumstance, and the profound responsibilities of power. It invites us to consider how one life, lived with such intensity and purpose, can forever alter the course of a nation. May these reflections bring a sense of quiet understanding as the sounds of the Texas night softly return, guiding you toward a peaceful and restorative rest.